few motorcycle gangs are as notorious as the Hells Angels. In this video, we watch as members face the law, reacting to sentences they never saw coming. And don't miss the shocking twist in Jay Witt's case, an unforgettable moment you won't expect.
The Hells Angels motorcycle gang is tonight at the ACI. Joseph Lancia was officially sentenced this morning, and only 12 News was there.
Joseph Lancia was the president of the Rhode Island chapter of the Hells Angels for about 4 years before he did something that put him on the wanted list of the Rhode Island Police Department. In June 2019, Lancia got into an argument with a prospective member of the club named Richard Starnino. The argument got heated, and Starnino left before things turned deadly. Richard entered his Mack semi-truck and began driving. He left a few seconds early because the moment he got into his truck to drive away, Lancia shot at Starnino outside the Hells Angel clubhouse. Lancia had waited for him to pass the front of the clubhouse before he fired a .25 caliber semi-automatic handgun at Starnino. Starnino reported to the police, and they executed a search warrant on the clubhouse. It seemed they were already suspicious of the activities of this particular chapter. The shooting opened up a blanket investigation. Upon arriving at the clubhouse, the police were denied entrance, and they ended up using a battering ram to enter the premises. Joseph Lancia was 28 at the time of the incident, and he was arrested. Another member of the club had removed the digital video recorder that captured the footage of the shooting. He was also arrested and charged with concealing a crime. Despite his initial insistence that he did nothing wrong, Lancia was charged with assault with the intent to commit murder, assault with a dangerous weapon, discharging a firearm while committing a crime of violence, and carrying a pistol without a permit. He was indicted and was eventually given a bail bond of $100,000. He paid the fee and was released with an order to have no contact with the victim. However, he soon approached Starnino and knocked him unconscious about a year later. He was arrested and charged with assault knocking someone unconscious. He pleaded no contest to this charge. Additional charges were brought against Lancia in connection to other crimes like drug dealing, extortion, and assault. With all of these charges, Lancia faced up to 61 years in prison if he was found guilty.
A 5-year full sentence, all of which is to be served at the ACI.
Because he pleaded no contest, Lancia was sentenced to 5 years in prison, 10 years of probation, and 8 years of no contact with Richard Starnino. In 2023, the parole board agreed to let Lancia out of prison early under certain conditions, including having no contact with Hells Angels members or being an officer of the club, as well as not having contact with convicted felons. He was released from prison in June 2023. Again, Lancia could not keep to the conditions of his early release and went about violating them. Lancia was spotted at the wake of the late Edward Eddie Lato, the reputed underboss of the Patriarca crime family. Among the other attendees were several people with criminal records, as well as fellow Hells Angels members, and at least 2 members of the Red Devils Motorcycle Club, a support group of the Hells Angels. He was arrested and put behind bars again for violating his agreement. However, his lawyer said that Lancia had asked for permission to attend Eddie Lato's wake. The email reportedly read, "The wake on Tuesday is for Eddie Lato's. I'm going alone with no club members. Eddie was a family friend." According to the lawyer, the parole officer responded that he was granted permission and that this was the only reason that Lancia went to the funeral. He was arrested again on September 15, 2024 and is still awaiting the next step. Joseph Lancia didn't kill anyone, but he still spent years paying for his crimes. Is he as bad as the ones that killed a fellow member for an argument?
The indictment spells it out. 11 members of the Hells Angels motorcycle gang accused of running a racketeering ring, which included robbery, extortion, and murder.
Jonathan Nelson, together with Russell Taylor Ott and Brian Wayne Went, committed a host of crimes that landed them in prison for the rest of their lives. What started as a club selling merch and sponsoring toy drives for children ended up as a gang of criminals that turned on each other. A member of the Sonoma charter of Hells Angels named Joel Silva got into an argument with a member of the Hells Angels Fresno chapter during an event at Laconia. This didn't sit right with Jonathan Nelson, who was also a member of the Sonoma chapter. Now, Nelson and Russell Taylor Ott were friends with the Fresno chapter's president, Brian Wayne Went. These 3 felt that Joel was disrespectful towards everything that their club stood for and decided that he needed to pay. Together, they orchestrated an elaborate plan to kill him. On July 15, 2014, Nelson approached Silva and told him that he needed to go to Fresno's Hells Angels clubhouse. According to Nelson, Silva needed to go there and fight with Went in order to resolve his problems with the club. Since he had insulted them, it was only right that he did that. Taylor Ott offered to drive Silva there. Unknown to Silva, Ott was actually driving him to his death. When they got to the club, before Silva could do anything, Wendt shot Silva in the head, killing him immediately. They didn't stop there because the next day they dumped Silva's body into an incinerator. These three were not immediately found and charged after his murder. They assumed that they had gotten away with it. It was not until 2017 that this proved to be wrong. In 2010, the DOJ, the Santa Rosa Police Department, and the California Highway Patrol began an investigation into the Sonoma chapter of Hells Angels. They have been looking for evidence of multiple crimes including murder, drug dealing, assault, robbery, extortion, illegal possession of firearms, and obstruction of justice. For 8 years, they continued to look for more and more evidence until it was enough for members of the club to be indicted in 2017. On October 10, 2017, a federal grand jury indicted 11 members and associates of the Hells Angels Sonoma chapter, charging the defendants with being part of a conspiracy whose members furthered the aims of the enterprise by engaging in a broad swath of criminal activity. The indictment described murder, narcotics distribution, assaults, robberies, extortion, illegal firearms possession, and obstruction of justice as being some of the activities in which the enterprise engaged to further its aims. The indictment also described how their members worked cooperatively with other Hells Angels chapters to engage in criminal activity. On September 11, 2018, a grand jury returned a superseding indictment adding the charge of murder related to the killing of Joel Silva. Nelson, Ott, and Wendt were not only charged with the murder of Joel Silva, but they were also charged with conspiracy and assault. They were also convicted of threatening the families of witnesses so they wouldn't cooperate with law enforcement. Ultimately, the three of them were sentenced to life in prison. As the gavel drops on Jonathan Nelson's fate, we move to the case of Jay Witt, a Hells Angels member whose shocking courtroom reaction took everyone by surprise.
Police need your help finding a man wanted for murder.
Take a look at him, 47-year-old Jay Witt. He faces a second-degree charge of murder in the death of 48-year-old William Furlong. Police found his body at the Hells Angels headquarters at 27th and J last month.
On the 14th of July, 2013, a high-ranking member and a prospective member of the Hells Angels got into a fight at the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club building in Omaha, Nebraska. Jay Witt and William Furlong, both 48, were having a disagreement when Witt allegedly pulled out a gun and shot Furlong. Unfortunately for Witt, Furlong couldn't survive the inflicted wounds and was eventually found deceased. A warrant was issued for Witt's arrest. Investigators were then able to track Witt through the GPS in a vehicle he had stolen before arresting him around 2 weeks later. Following his arrest, Witt was charged with second-degree murder, as well as charges for the use of a weapon to commit a felony and possession of a weapon by a felon. In response to these charges, during his October 2014 trial, a judge found Mr. Witt guilty of the crimes. However, the second-degree murder charge had been dropped in favor of a manslaughter charge following an earlier guilty plea, which Witt made in exchange for the dropping of his murder charge. While in court, one detective testified that she had found Furlong's body lying face up near the bar area of the clubhouse. Another testified that surveillance footage from outside the clubhouse had shown a man similar to Witt enter into the clubhouse with his girlfriend at around 2:15 a.m., less than 3 hours before Furlong appeared. The video in case showed the man who resembled Witt and his girlfriend leave around 9:30 a.m. with a plastic bag before he's once again spotted, wiping down the door and door handles of a Chevy Cruze with towels before leaving in the vehicle. The woman in the video was identified in court to be Tammy Kozak, and she was charged with tampering of evidence and accessory to murder. And a sergeant in the court testified that she, along with Witt, had stopped at a gas station after they fled the scene before they drove to Harlan, Iowa, probably to get away from the center of the crime. During his court hearing, Witt maintained an ice-cold demeanor, just as you would expect from any Hells Angel. But at the end, the judge sentenced Witt to 30 to 40 years in prison, of which the first 17 and a half must be served before he would be eligible for parole. Witt showed no emotions after listening to his sentence, and even reportedly claimed he did it out of self-defense. Furlong's wife was present in court and came to the defense of her deceased husband, saying he shouldn't be judged by his outward appearance. Witt sadly died in September 2019 at the Nebraska Department of Correctional Services, following a long battle with illness. He was 53 years old at the time, and state law required that a grand jury conducted an investigation into the situation. Jay Witt's crime shocked everyone with its cold calculation, but the next case is a different kind of nightmare. Enter Caius Veovis, a man whose appearance is as terrifying as his violent, ritualistic acts.
Now, I'll see you all in hell, too. Remember that. Every one of you, I'll see you in hell.
Let's head to Hampden County Superior Court, where a dramatic scene unfolds when Caius Veovis was to be sentenced for 3 counts of murder. Caius Domitius Veiovis, real name Roy Gutfinski, was born in Augusta, Maine, and was a self-proclaimed vampire and Satanist with a bizarrely distinct look. His implanted head bumps which resemble horns, his reshaped earlobes, and his dozens of tattoos, including one on his forehead which reads 666, certainly don't paint the look of an angel. As far back as the year 1995, a 13-year-old Roy Gutfinski Jr., who had already developed a fascination for devil worship, was already getting into serious trouble with law enforcement. When he was 20, a prosecutor recommended that he be kept behind bars for as long as possible following a ritual bloodletting case with his then-girlfriend, which left a 16-year-old girl scarred for life. Gutfinski ended up serving a 7.5-year sentence for this. Gutfinski struggled with substance abuse from a very young age and was in and out of jail a lot between the late 90s and mid-2000s. He constantly referred to himself by the police as a vampire and began to alter his looks, which ultimately culminated in legally changing his name to Caius Veiovis, after a vampire from the TV series Twilight in 2008. In 2011, 3 men, David Glasser, Edward Frampton, and Robert Chadwell, were found buried outside of Pittsfield, Massachusetts 10 days after they were reported missing. There were 3 suspects: 37-year-old Adam Lee Hall, 47-year-old David Chalou, and Caius Veiovis himself, who was 34 at the time. Prosecutors accused Veiovis of helping the other 2 men kidnap and shoot the victims in order to prevent them from testifying after they witnessed the death of Glasser, who himself was eliminated to prevent him from testifying in a case against Hall, who was a high-ranking member of the Massachusetts chapter of the Hells Angels. Veiovis' trial began nearly 3 years later in September 2014, as he was already pretty notorious at the time, so it was no surprise when a media frenzy erupted around the case due to his involvement in the case. During the trial, both Hall and Chalou were convicted of 3 counts of murder, kidnapping, and witness intimidation, and sentenced to life in prison. Veiovis was the last out of the 3 men to face trial, and he pleaded not guilty to all charges against him. Despite the various pieces of evidence which suggested his involvement in the murders, Veiovis' trial was a rather lengthy one and had to be moved 50 miles to Hampden County Superior Court in Springfield to avoid a biased jury. Veiovis tried to maintain his innocence for as long as possible, claiming that he had rejected all the plea deals offered to him from the beginning and that he'd rather do life than accept any of those deals. His court-appointed attorney, James Reardon, also accused the state of lacking concrete evidence against his client. After over 37 hours of deliberation spanning 6 days, the jury found Veiovis guilty of kidnapping, murdering the 3 men, and he was sentenced to 3 consecutive life sentences without the option of parole.
As to each of the 3 counts of murder, impose a sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole each.
And Veiovis' reaction to the jury's verdict was something you could have expected. "I'll see you all in hell. Remember that."
Yeah, I'll see you all in hell, too. Remember that. Every one of you, I'll see you in hell.
He also revealed that he was going to appeal the verdict to the state Supreme Court. Veiovis, meanwhile, is currently completing his term at Gardner, Massachusetts, North Central Correctional Institution. Caius Veiovis, with his sinister appearance and brutal crimes, is unforgettable. But our next case takes us from dark rituals to the deadly world of biker gangs.
Hells Angels just shot at Vagos. There's 2 down.
Let's head to Henderson, Las Vegas, where things escalated into attempted murder on a local highway between 2 rival motorcycle gangs. It was a Memorial Day Sunday morning on the 29th of May, 2022, when members of the Vagos Outlaw motorcycle gang were shot at on a highway while riding back from a Memorial Day event in Boulder City. The perpetrators? Some members of the Hells Angel Motorcycle Club, of course. Police were able to arrest 3 of the suspects, 66-year-old Richard Rizzo DeVries, along with 46-year-old Stephen Allo and 26-year-old Russell Smith. DeVries was eventually identified as the president of the Hells Angels Las Vegas chapter, one of the most powerful chapters of the club, while the other 2 were said to be Hells Angels prospects. Police reports recounted that while the Vagos members were trying to participate in the prior event, a group of 5 Hells Angels members were seen riding around and followed them till they began to cause problems during the event. They also reportedly left the event about 20 minutes before the Vagos members began riding towards Henderson, where they waited to ambush the Vagos gang. The result was injuries to 6 of the Vagos bikers and a closure of the highway for several hours, as the police conducted an investigation while the injured bikers were transported to a local hospital for treatment. Investigators, in collaboration with the Las Vegas Met Police Department's Criminal Intelligence Unit, were able to identify the 3 suspects using surveillance footage, as well as civilian footage of the shooting. This ultimately led to the June arrest of DeVries and the other 2 men who were booked into the Henderson Detention Center on the charges of 6 counts of attempted murder with a deadly weapon, a single count of conspiracy to commit murder with a deadly weapon, 6 counts of battery with the use of a deadly weapon causing substantial harm, 6 counts of discharging a gun at or into an occupied structure or vehicle, with the latter 2 charges labeled to have occurred with a criminal gang enhancement. 5 additional Hells Angels were also indicted by a second Clark County grand jury in connection with the incident, and additional charges included attempted murder, racketeering, as well as harboring concealed weapons. A Las Vegas former special agent, Aaron Rouse, suggested that the arrests could lead up to a federal prosecution for the Hells Angels on RICO charges based on the group's activities. That kind of thing has the potential to dissolve the Hells Angels Las Vegas chapter. DeVries was able to post bail following his indictment by the Clark County grand jury. His court appearance was set for the 24th of August, 2022, where he appeared with his attorney, Richard Schoenfeld. But on the 3rd of October 2022, he was rearrested and taken back into custody on additional felony charges, which included racketeering. In the court, he showed a cool and calm demeanor, as if to suggest to the court that he had it all under control. This time, 8th District Court Judge Tierra Jones ordered DeVries to be held on a $250,000 bond, which he once again posted. During a separate court hearing set on March 31, 2023, which involved all the other suspects, DeVries' attorney, Richard Schoenfeld, suggested that the evidence used to indict the Hells Angels members was insufficient. He also claimed that Vagos members had concealed weapons during the incident, and that police at the scene had examined some of their handguns only to return them. As a result, the judge instructed prosecutors to revise the indictment. On Monday, May 1, 2023, Clark County District Judge Tierra Jones decided that the 7 alleged Hells Angels members would not be facing racketeering or gang charges for their involvement in the highway shooting, which left a total of 7 people injured. During the hearing, Judge Jones also reduced the number of shooting counts from 25 to 5 in the case against the defendants, including Richard DeVries. DeVries' attorney, Richard Schoenfeld, revealed his pleasure at the judge's ruling, claiming that the initial indictment was too broad and had to be revised. DeVries, along with the other 6 men, which now include Cameron Treach, Aaron Chun, and Ryan Molasco, still face prosecution on charges of attempted murder, battery, and assault with weapons. And even though they've all pleaded not guilty to the charges, they each face up to 40 years in prison if convicted. A trial date has been set for the 28th of May, 2024, a day short of the 2-year anniversary of the incident. For now, the 7 men, including Richard DeVries, are free, but they could be facing the same fate as others on this list by the time you watch this video. With Richard DeVries facing the consequences of his violent choices, up next we have Zane Peora Wallace, a ruthless enforcer whose brutal crimes stunned the courtroom. On July 31, 2019, the body of Jasmine Wilson was unrecognizable in the hospital where she was admitted. The 30-year-old Maori woman was covered in bruises and wounds from head to toe. Her body was so bruised up that her skin color had changed to black and blue. She had multiple fractured ribs and broken bones, indicating that she had been suffering from months of endless torture and beatings. On August 2, 2019, Jasmine Wilson passed away from her injuries. Her death caused an investigation to be opened. The police needed to know why she ended up that way. The police officer in charge of Wilson's case said that he had never seen anything as bad as what he saw. But what happened exactly? Who did this to the mother of 2? At first, it looked like she was kidnapped and tortured by someone she didn't know. The police were shocked to find out that the person who did this to her was her boyfriend, Zane Peora Wallace. Wallace belonged to the Hells Angels chapter in New Zealand, and he had a long history of violence with multiple convictions in the past for assaulting his former partners. Jasmine was another unfortunate victim on his list. Investigation revealed that Jasmine was unconscious when she was dumped in the hospital. The abuse that Jasmine suffered began in the final 9 months of her life. According to the investigation, Jasmine and Wallace rekindled their old flame from when they were teenagers in those 9 months. Jasmine was abused and assaulted throughout that period. In November 2018, they'd been driving when he forced her to pull over before collecting her keys and kicking her in the chest. Over the course of 9 months, he beat her head in, slapped and assaulted her in public and private. He was reported to have assaulted her at a Hells Angels club while the other members watched and did nothing. He would also constantly threaten to slit her throat. splatter her brains across the pavement, and kill her children. Even when he was in prison, he made many threatening calls to Jasmine to keep her scared. During the 9 months they were together, Wallace not only assaulted Jasmine, but he also attacked her friend and 2 other people at a party. The last of the assaults that Jasmine suffered was in July 2019. Wallace punched Jasmine multiple times in the head over the course of 2 days. On July 31st, he pushed her head against the wall, and her head smacked against the concrete so hard that Jasmine became unconscious. Wallace called his father for help, and things took a downward turn from there. His father, Stephen Wallace, arrived at the home, and instead of calling 911, he put her body in his car and called Wallace's mother, Leanne. Leanne called Wallace's sister, Stevie Lee, and together, the whole family worked to hide the evidence of what was done to Jasmine. To obstruct evidence, they even switched the cars that took Jasmine to the hospital so that security footage wouldn't catch them. Stevie Lee Wallace was the one who took Wilson to the hospital and dumped her there. This didn't last because they were eventually caught and charged for trying to obstruct justice. They were sentenced for perverting justice, and it was finally time to deal with Wallace. In the time before he was arrested for the murder of Jasmine, Wallace also assaulted a man and a woman at another party he went to after Jasmine died. He was arrested and charged with murder. He was also convicted of 4 charges of threatening grievous bodily harm, 3 of assault with intent to injure, 2 of threatening to kill, and 1 each of injuries with intent to injure, assault, male assaults female, and demands with menace. 3 years later, Wallace pleaded guilty to murdering Jasmine before the jury was selected. He also pleaded guilty to all the other charges. In court, Jasmine's family were in tears as they saw their relative's murderer walk into court. Since Wallace pleaded guilty without a trial, his sentencing was quick. Wallace was sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 15 years. Jasmine's family was not satisfied with the sentence and started insulting Wallace and his family. Things descended into chaos when Wallace and Jasmine's family almost started to beat up each other. Eventually, they had to be let out of the courtroom to avoid physical violence. The Hells Angels' reactions show that even the toughest criminals aren't prepared for the reality of their sentences. But the story doesn't end here. Check out the next video on screen to see more shocking courtroom moments you won't believe.